What's good, listeners? Our guest on Just Talking is director and writer Jenny Waldo to discuss her debut feature film, Acid Test, live on the Chris Collins Show, Millennial Talk Show. How's it going, fam?
Woo-woo!
You doing good, Jenny?
Hi, Jenny.
Hey. Yeah,
hey, what's good? Hey, well, that's great. We love hearing that from you. And I feel like it's, since we are a video on air production, I think it's our own due diligence that we go ahead and showcase the teaser now of Acid Test. So, guys, check it out. This is an amazing film.
All right, so you pick me up at 11? Go. Bye, Mom. Bye. It's been way too long. It was almost impossible to get out of that house. My dad just kept arguing and... Bye. All right, kid. Let's go have some fun. I dropped acid. What? Took a tab of acid. Could you please sit for me? Should be kicking in any moment now. What? Is this why you invited me? Drop acid.
Oh, yeah, Jenny, congrats on the success of your debut feature film, Acid Test. And for anybody that was just watching that teaser trailer right now, what is this film all about?
Well, it's a coming-of-age rebellion story, and it's fueled by Riot Grrrl music, a dysfunctional family, and, of course, LSD. So it's set in the 90s, and it's based on my own troubles. And so it's a kind of blast from the past, but it has a lot of relevant themes to what's going on today.
And Jenny, it's my understanding, as you just said right now, it's based on true events. This film, Acid Test, really kind of figuring out your own self-discovery. And why was it important for you to tell your story?
Well, I hadn't seen a character that I identified with much, especially with some of the, when they talk about female filmmakers or female-centered films, the Riot Grrrl aesthetic. I was a punk kid, that I didn't see that a lot for the girl story, so to speak. And Riot Grrrl has kind of come back actually, in the last, since we've been working on the film, and Bikini Kill has done a reunion tour, and we had Moxie, which was a Netflix movie that kind of incorporated some of that aesthetic. But when we started, and we started with a short film, none of that had started at all. And so I just felt like there was something about the kind of angry female population that I hadn't seen. And this was also before the Me Too movement. So there was kind of this collective, I think, angst building with this, kind of being overlooked or pushed to the side or marginalized.
Yeah, and I agree. I think the only, like I said, I'm, all into punk rock too, and I agree with you. I think the only movie that I can pinpoint growing up on and seeing myself reflected, and it was more of a comedy takeoff, was Tank Girl. Tank Girl came out and I was like, oh my God, that's me, but funnier. You know what I mean? Right. Other than that, there was nothing, because when you talk about the anger that wells up, I mean, that's what drew me to punk. That's why I'm still in there, in the pits, stage diving, right? An outlet for this anger and stuff that you definitely showcased in there, which was great.
And Jenny, when you decided to write and direct a movie about dropping acid at a concert and then coming home, confessing to your parents that you're tripping balls, there must have been some genuine nerves. I mean, to retell your story. I mean, were your parents receptive of this film?
Well, it definitely has been a journey. And again, to a certain extent, because we started with a short film, there's been time to kind of acclimate, I think. I was definitely terrified of being personal about these things. And I'm also a mom, in a suburban neighborhood. I mean, when people are like, hey, what do you do? And I'm like, I just directed a movie about dropping acid. Oh, and it's based on me. Like, that's not something you really talk about around the soccer field or the swimming pool.
Yeah, because they're probably thinking that you're directing like some X-rated comedy film. I mean, that would be my first reaction.
So it definitely was something that brought a lot of nerves, but I'm the type of person, and I think you see it in the punk scene where it's like, and you see it creatively, where if it scares you, that's exactly what you should be doing.
Right.
And
I mean,
so,
when,
yeah.
when you're discussing, you know, a touching matter, you know, sparking a hallucinogenic family meltdown, I can only imagine that it's terrifying on a level. Am I right? I mean, was that kind of tough to have to go back in the past and refocus on these moments that clearly I could see right now with you right now live on YouTube that you're a totally different woman now?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It was, I really feel like writing the feature film was kind of a moment of psychosis for me, because I had to go back and think about, you know, difficult, conflicted things I'm not fully resolved with, you know, just for myself or even with my parents, and kind of live in that and think about it in this, not just from a therapeutic standpoint, but like, how would this make a good narrative film, you know? And so it was a really weird thing to do, and certainly, you know, there were times where my parents would call to check in, and we do have an ongoing and, you know, settled relationship now, which you know, they're very supportive. But it would, you know, I'd be kind of like thinking about these moments, these arguments, and they'd call me and be like, "Hey, how's it going?" And I'd be like, "Ah," you know, I just
Yeah,
couldn't
not
quite
the
get out
time to
of
be
that, you know?
kindling at the moment. Because I know Jenny,
So,
Acid Test is, you know, more than just an acid trip. It's a coming of age story of a teenage girl's path to challenging her family's dynamics. And how did Riot Grrrl music change the way you view yourself in the world?
well, you know, like we were talking about, I was really into the punk kind of scene. And the punk scene historically has been a fairly masculine scene. And there were a lot of things that I liked about that. I was a tomboy. I was not particularly very girly. When I cut off all my hair, people, you know, often mistook me for a boy, and I didn't really feel very comfortable in my femininity, you know, or what it meant to be a girl or a woman. And so for me in the 90s, and I grew up in Washington D.C. when Bikini Kill was based there, you know, so I got to kind of be there at their early concerts, and this idea of, you know, how do we make space for women in this scene and for girls, and can you still be a girl and still be cool and still be, you know, punk rock and all this stuff. It really opened up this, you know, just even for myself, this idea of how can I be me, and like, you know, recognize all of my facets and who I am, and not necessarily cut it off because I was uncomfortable with it. And so it really just it really was a before and after moment where I really feel like Riot Grrrl changed everything about it, and opened up this idea of how to be political and to be active and to bring that into my everyday life, and how do you push back on things, how do you ask for what you need, how do you
Yeah.
find your voice, you know? So it was really instrumental in who I've become.
No, I think that is such a great point, Jenny. And I know before Riot Grrrl, the scene, you know, really took off, how, you know, Kurt Cobain really addressed a lot of the things that you were saying. He would call it cock rock, you know, the punk rock music scene, because it was full of men. And, you know, who were these female bands that you were growing up listening to in the Riot Grrrl scene? I know you said Bikini Kills, but were there some of these other iconic female acts that really kind of stuck with you all these years?
Well, my favorite band was a local DC band called Slant Six. And they were, I saw so many of their shows, and they would often play or open for Fugazi. And, you know, there were other kind of bands, you know, the smaller bands, or, you know, that Sonic Youth was also, they were a bigger kind of band and kind of punk adjacent to a certain extent, but, you know, they were just amazing. And the icons that came before, you know, like Debbie Harry is
Yeah.
punk, you know, even though it's just all of that stuff was so inspirational, and it was such an education. I got into Billie Holiday, who was also so punk, but just in the jazz scene, you know, so.
No, I totally hear you on that one, Jenny. And I know, I don't mean to bring up your age, Marissa, but like I wasn't necessarily born during the Riot Grrrl era.
Mhm.
So like, how was that scene like, growing up? I mean, Marissa, did you ever get involved in the Riot Grrrl scene? I feel like this would be right up your alley,
Well, a
along with
lot
Jenny.
of I was living on the streets of Hollywood during a lot of that time, and I grew up with female fronted bands listening to like Naked Aggression would be like LA's female fronted, still playing to this day, very pro woman. Vice Squad from out in the UK, just stuff like that. But most of the bands that I loved and followed, GBH, they were all men bands. There weren't a lot of female fronted bands. You'd
Yeah.
have a female bassist once in a while. Every blue moon nowadays, you see female drummers. And I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah, that's
hey,
true.
my
And I
friend
know that's why a
Brittany.
lot of excitement's
But,
happening
yeah.
currently right now with like Paramore. I wouldn't say Paramore is necessarily a Riot Grrrl
Yeah.
music, but obviously, she's grown from inspiration from that. But Jenny, I kind of wanted to bring this up because I'm sure you're aware of the Riot Grrrl's famous manifesto. We are angry at
Yeah.
society that tells us girls equal dumb, girl equals bad, girl equals weak. So when you hear this, what goes through your mind?
Yes. And that's why we incorporated it into the film. These were words that it was a lightning rod for me. And so we have in the feature film, that's one of the discoveries is they find one of these Riot Grrrl manifesto zines and start reading it out loud at the concert, and then that's threaded through. They kind of come back to it and they read different passages, and so it really was something again where this idea, that kind of internal monologue that you have that kind of tears you down, or you're absorbing it from little cues or unspoken things. It really is something that when you see it in black and white like that, you're like, oh my god, it's amazing.
Yeah, and I really feel like it hasn't gone away anytime soon. What I find really incredible, Jenny, is that the Riot Grrrl movement turned 30 back in 2021, but it feels like this feminine movement is never went away. And there was a line that really stuck out with me in your film where Jenny, the character, says, quote, "What does having sex now mean that you're a woman? Why does it mean that you have to be together?" I don't even know what I'm thinking or feeling, but I'm sure the viewers want to know, what did you want us to take away from that scene?
Well, I think there's, the running theme is this idea of identity. And to a certain extent, the Riot Grrrl had, was problematic to a certain extent. It wasn't very intersectional, especially when it was, just starting out. And so there's been, in the evolution of Riot Grrrl and society in general, there's been a lot more kind of discussion around this. But the overall idea is, how do we define our identities? How do we fit within, society? And there are all of these different things or ideas that are being told to us, or that we read, or we, like I said, absorb from movies and television and from what other people are talking about. And we're constantly thinking about like, oh, well, this is what happened to somebody, like, does that affect me? And this idea, I mean, certainly, sexuality and developing relationships, this idea of, how do I define myself? How do I define myself as a couple? Am I now defined by, this man or whoever that I'm engaging with? And so, that's all kind of part of the internal monologue that's kind of running. And, I just kind of wanted to have these little questions and these little spaces open up where it's like, you're not defined by whoever it is that you're with, and you have to kind of define yourself. And
Do you think that that we're wired to have lots of casual encounters? Like, do you think that as women we're wired that way to have it? Because that's something that I question.
I think that there's a fascinating and probably ever long conversation that we could be having about it. I do think that there are biological kind of hardwiring genetic things, which can muddy the waters. There's a lot of hormonal things that kind of start pumping through and, can, I think, influence or change how we're thinking about things, you know, much like any drug might. And I think there's a spectrum, you know, there's a spectrum of where people kind of fall on, you know, where they, you know, who they hook up with or who they don't hook up with and all that stuff. And so, you know, I think I wouldn't ever want to say it is one thing because to me that was kind of the biggest thing. And one of my running arguments with my own teenage kids now is like, for me, the reason why I've embraced the female filmmaker moniker, which I kind of didn't like when I first started becoming a filmmaker, because I was kind of like, well, I love all kinds of films. I mean, I love Quentin Tarantino films, or I love, you know, it's like, you know, there's nothing, I want to make those kinds of films. But the reason why I kind of adopted it was because, you know, it is a white male dominated industry. And, you know, I wanted to kind of make that statement and also make space for female films that covered things that I wasn't seeing in the female led films, because, you know, I wasn't really identifying with many of those either. And so for me, this idea of, you know, which box do you pick? And you see in the, you know, like I said, in my teens, there are like many, many, many boxes now in terms of how you identify. And so on one hand, it's great because there's kind of more discussion and more diversity. On the other hand, I've got decision fatigue, being like, am I this box and this and this? It's like, can't we just have a box that's like human and check? And it's the umbrella term for,
preach, Jenny. No, totally preach.
I find it interesting, just because I'm you know, as a mother to a young girl, I'll be honest with you, I would never want my child in the punk scene back in the 90s growing up. Women were groomed. I was groomed. My boyfriend was 21. I was 15. That was so common. The grooming, the sexualization, being pro women, have sex what you want, really benefited the men. Yeah, I'm just be honest, you know what I mean? So I see those tones in your film and so on. So it just always makes me bring that up as a female, like, how liberated are we when we say, oh, I can have sex with anybody, but is that hurting us? And then are we also being groomed that way?
Yeah, right. Yeah, the whole sex positive culture, I think it's, you know, again, there are many wonderful things about it. On the other hand, you do want to think about, and this actually came up a lot in my collaboration with Giant Kitty, which is the main band. They're no longer together, unfortunately. But, you know, in the film, you know, Miriam, the lead singer, and I would talk about, she'd be like, you know, it really bothers me that there are a lot of people, a lot of men who love Riot Grrrl just because it's hot to see a woman screaming, you know, or like in pain, you know what I mean? Or it's that idea of like the strong female character that can kick your ass, but like it's also kind of like a twisted attraction, you know. And so I think these are all part of kind of the nuanced conversation that I love having, and hope Acid Test sparks, you know, in other people, that it's not one thing or another. It's like there is a lot of gray, and you know, half the time growing up, and this is threaded through, like I'd be like, well, am I a good Riot Grrrl, you know, because I, you know, like you too also, you know what I mean? It's like you know.
No, and on that note, funny. Jenny, I think that is definitely you know, fair enough. And guys, you know, anybody who has not checked out this film yet, go ahead and check out Jenny Waldo's directorial feature film debut, Acid Test. It's an incredible film. And where can they check that out today?
Yes, acidtestfilm.com is our website. We've got links to the digital platforms that we're on. We're on, you know, iTunes, Vudu, Google Play, Amazon, and Comcast, and other platforms. So you can check us out on acidtestfilm.com. Acid Test Film is our handle on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and TikTok.
Rock and roll, Jenny Waldo. We can't thank you enough for joining the Chris College Show Millennial Talk Show. It is a phenomenal film, and the next time you drop that next feature piece, definitely reach out. We'd love to have you back on, fam.
Thank you so much. Jenny. It was great. I appreciate it.